Hey there, Brandon Soriano here from All Guitar Network, and in this video we're going to learn the basics of home recording for guitar players. By the end of this video you'll know exactly what you need to do to start recording great guitar sounds at home today. My goal for this is that you don't just come away from it knowing how to follow the instructions, but I actually want you to understand what you're doing and why, how everything works and what everything's function is within the recording process. I feel like when you do it this way there's a lot more room for improvement, whereas if you just learn how to follow instructions, you can't really go anywhere from there unless you learn a new set of instructions. So the goal for this, again, is that you really master the basic concepts and understand the hows and the whys so that your recordings can continue to get better over time. So in this video, we're going to focus on the most common way to record your guitar, that is with an interface and a microphone, and I'm going to make sure that you're really good at this one technique and really understand what's going on with it. And then in future videos, I'm going to build upon that knowledge, add different techniques, different ways of recording, different microphones, blah blah blah. So that being said, let's jump right into it and start learning how to home record. So first things first, to record really well, it needs to sound good in the first place. So before you do any of this stuff, before you start recording, make sure you really get to know your instrument, your guitar and your amplifier, which is an extension of your instrument, and get the best tone that you can. Just really get something that inspires you to record. Because at the end of the day, no matter how good you are at the recording technique, if the actual tone and the sound isn't great, it's not going to be a great recording. So really take the time to dial in that tone and work on your sound before you start this process. Now, once you have that all dialed in, you need some software to run this through. There are tons of free DAWs, that's D-A-W, Digital Audio Workstation. There are tons of DAWs that are free or cheap or very expensive, depending on what you want to do, but some examples of the free ones that I would recommend are GarageBand, Cakewalk, Reaper, Studio One Prime, and there's tons of others, Audacity. So just do some research. Honestly, the best one to use is just the one that you have, the one that you're comfortable with. Nowadays, pretty much every digital audio workstation can do the job, and it's really just about which one you prefer. So once you have your tone dialed in and you have your software downloaded, the next thing that you need for this is an audio interface. Now, what is an audio interface? It's probably something you've seen before or heard about, but a lot of people surprisingly don't exactly understand what it is or what it does. The type of interface we're looking at today is a desktop interface that plugs into your computer with a USB. It's the Scarlett 2i2 by Focusrite. This is one of the most common desktop audio interfaces, but there are plenty of others out there. SSL just released a great one called the SSL2, and there's another version, the SSL2 Plus, and there are tons of variations. M-Audio, the Scarlett ones like we have. Just do some research and pick the one that's best for you and your price point. But pro tip, you can get away doing this with a single input on your interface. They sell ones like the Scarlett Solo that just have one plug in there, but I highly recommend that you get one that has two, and there are a few reasons for that. When you have two inputs, there's a lot more freedom to get different sounds. So for instance, I will often put two microphones on my guitar amp at the same time and blend them, or if I'm recording acoustic guitar, I'll put two mics on the acoustic guitar and blend those. And then lastly, if I ever want to record me maybe playing guitar and singing or something like that, I'm gonna want those two inputs. So if you can spring for it, definitely try to get something with two inputs instead of one. Now, most of these interfaces are plug and play. You can just kind of plug them in via USB, go into the audio settings of your computer or your DAW, or both in some cases, and just change the input and the output to your interface that you've just set up. Some of them might require that you use drivers that you have to download from the internet, but we won't get into that. Just know that whichever interface you get, you should do some research online on how to properly set it up, but a lot of them are as simple as just plugging it in, changing the settings in your computer, and going. Now, this type of desktop interface has two ways for you to record your guitar. You can either go directly into the interface, or you can mic up a guitar amp using the microphone input. The second one is what we're going to be doing today. That's by far the most common way to record guitar, using a microphone through your interface to mic up the amplifier. We'll talk about recording direct guitar in a later video. That's kind of a whole subject of its own that we can dive into. The first thing you need to know about your interface is how it functions and what's going on. So let's take a look at this one that I have right over here, the 2i2. If you look at the basic setup of this interface, there are two preamps on it. What a preamp is basically something that makes the microphone louder. Microphones naturally are very, very quiet, and you need a preamp to boost that level so that you can use it in your recording. So let's take a deep dive into the controls on the front panel of our audio interface. So looking right here is the combo input jack. This is what we were just talking about earlier. You can put two types of cables in here, either a 1/4 inch input that goes in the middle or an XLR that goes on the outside. XLR is generally for microphones and 1/4 inch is generally for plugging your guitar straight in. Now the next thing we're looking at is this right here. This is your gain knob. What's important about the gain knob is that this controls the level you're recording at. So if I crank it up, my mic is going to be super loud. If I turn it down, my mic is going to be really, really soft. This is going to vary depending on what type of microphone you're recording with and what type of sound source you have. Is it a loud sound or is it a soft sound? Now the next thing that you might notice is right below the gain knob. Right here we have something that says line or instrument. We're not going to worry about this switch right now. That'll be in a later video, but what you need to know for now is that when your guitar is plugged straight in, you would go to the instrument side, and since we're using a mic, I'm just going to leave it on the line side. Now moving over here, you just have an exact copy of everything else from the first side, so you just have another combo input, another gain knob, and another mic instrument line thing. So now we're on this half of the interface, and the first button right here says 48V. That means 48 volts of phantom power. Basically, certain microphones need more power to function, so you have to press that button. For what we're doing in this video, we're not going to worry about it yet. Once again, in a later video, I will cover what that button does, and we'll get to using it a little bit. So now you see these two big knobs, the bigger one right here, and then the slightly smaller one over here. This bigger one is monitor output. So on the back of the interface, you would plug this into speakers like I have right here and here. And this big knob would control the volume of those speakers. Then you have this smaller knob right here that is for your headphones, which plug in right there. Now do be warned that your headphones need to have a 1/4 inch to plug into that, so you might have to get an adapter or a different cable for your headphones. So moving back here, we have just the volume for our headphones and the volume for our monitor, and then right next to all this that I haven't mentioned yet is this down here, which is direct monitoring. So let's talk about direct monitoring, what it is and what it does. Monitoring, as you might know, is just listening back to what's going on in the interface. You're monitoring what's happening. Say that I am recording my guitar and inside of my computer I've added a bunch of effects. I've added just a ton of effects. If I don't have direct monitoring on, I'm going to hear all of those effects in my headphones. So when direct monitoring is off, I hear what's being processed in the computer in my headphones or through my monitors. That can be a good thing sometimes, but it can be a bad thing sometimes. While it's doing all that processing in my computer, it's causing what we call latency, which means there's going to be a delay from the time that I actually play the guitar to the time that I hear it in my headphones. Obviously, latency is not ideal for when you're recording. It makes it harder to play and record and stay with the beat. So often you would turn on direct monitoring to eliminate that problem. You're not going to hear all the special effects anymore that are going on in your computer, but you are going to get zero latency recording. So now that we know all about our audio interface, we need a microphone to plug into that audio interface. I highly recommend that you start with just one microphone, and specifically I think you should start with the SM-57. The Shure SM-57 is just an industry standard. You've probably seen it around. These are cheap, they're affordable. I think brand new, less than $100, and used you could get them for less than that, sometimes like 80, 60, sometimes 30, 40, depending on condition. Mine has clearly been used and abused. It's pretty old and beat up and has tape on it and stuff, but it works great and it sounds great. So again, just to reiterate, the way that you would use this in context is that you would take an XLR cable out from here on the mic and you would just put it into this combo jack right here on the interface. Alright, so we have our interface covered, we have our microphone covered, now we need to know where do we put the mic. So what you really need to know is that in your amp there's a speaker. You might have a bunch of speakers if you have like a 2x12, 4x12, whatever, but we're just going to focus on one. Start with just one speaker, one microphone, and make sure you're placing it really intentionally. It'll make all the difference. So when we're talking about the parts of the speaker, there are a lot of components in a speaker, but as guitar players who are miking our amps, we should really be concerned with two main sections of the speaker. The speaker in your amp isn't going to look that different from this speaker right over here. It's going to have this part in the center, which I'll just call the center, and then it has this dust cone coming around, and then we'll call this outside part the edge, that outer part. You can place your microphone kind of anywhere on that spectrum, but I'll talk about the different ways to place your mic and why you might put it there. So starting with the center, if I take my microphone and I put it right in the middle of the speaker like that on my amp, it's going to get a really high, crispy, kind of brittly sound. As I move this out toward the edge, kind of over there, it's going to be much lower, it's going to be warmer, and it's going to be less defined. There's less clarity in that sound. Now the key, in my opinion, is to start in the middle, right between that center spot and the outer edge. So if this is the center and this is the outer edge, I want my mic to start right in the middle of the two. And then you adjust to taste. So if that works, then stick with that. That works fine. If you want more brightness in your sound, move it toward that center. If you want more warm, dark tones in your sound, move it toward that edge. I think that's the best way to start with placing your microphone. So, in order to put all of this into practice, we need to know where on our amp the speaker is. You might have noticed that you don't really see a speaker on this. On some amps it'll be exposed, but most amps have this grill cloth in front. So a really handy trick is if you take the flashlight from your phone and put it right up on the amplifier, you can see inside of the grill cloth, and you can see where that speaker is at. You can kind of move it around if you need to. This works better on some amps than others. If you have an amp where the grill cloth is, you know, not very see-through and you can't see the speaker, then you can just use your ear mainly, kind of guesstimate to your best knowledge where the speaker might be. But if you do have one, you might as well try this out first. See if you can find where that speaker is inside of the amp. Okay, so I've used my phone flashlight and found where the speaker was inside. Now I'm going to take my microphone, and this would be on a stand, of course. I'll show this in a minute. But once this is see-through and I can see where that speaker is, I'm going to start with my mic right in between the center of the speaker and the edge. So remember we said before, this is the center where that little circle thing is in the middle, and then as you come around to the outer circle, that's the edge. I'm going to start it right in between the two. This is my starting point. From there, if I need different sounds, I can move in or out. As far as distance goes, how far should your mic be from the grill cloth? I always say a good distance is like a pinky's distance. So you can literally take your pinky and put the mic right about there. That should be about enough space. It's really a short distance. The mic is pretty much right up on the grill. If you move it far away, you're going to get a lot less low end because of something called the proximity effect. Proximity effect means that the closer you get, the more bass there is in your sound. You don't want to actually touch the grill cloth because that's too close. It might get too muddy, too bassy, and you might get some weird noises from that. But if you're just like a pinky's distance away, or maybe a pen or a pencil, that's generally a perfect distance. So we have our tone dialed in, we have our interface ready, we have our software ready, we have the microphone placed perfectly on the amplifier. All that's left now is to set your level. So when setting your level, it's important to remember that you don't really want to be changing the volume on your amplifier all that much unless there's a big problem with it, like it is too quiet or too loud. But the more you change the volume on your amp, the more you're going to change your tone. And you don't really want that. You want your tone to stay consistent because you like that tone. So instead, you're going to use the gain knob on your interface. So looking back over here at our interface, we have our gain knob. Our microphone is plugged in through the XLR. Right now it's in the middle, but say that my guitar is too quiet coming into the computer. I can't really hear the signal that well. I'm going to turn this gain up. So now we're back in the middle, and say that my guitar now is too loud. I'm going to just turn this gain down. It's as easy as that to actually adjust the gain on the microphone for your guitar amp. So you know how to adjust the gain, but where should you actually be putting the gain? What should you shoot for? Now, ideally, you want to be recording in your software between -6 and -12. Well, what does that mean? If you open the mixer in your software, or if you look at the channel strip where all the faders are, you're going to see a diagram that's green when you're playing, and eventually, if you're too hot or too loud, it'll turn orange and then red, and that means you're clipping. Right up at the top of that is a 0. You don't want to hit 0. That means that you're clipping, so you want to be in the negatives below that 0. Ideally between -6 and -12. The reason for that is because it gives you a lot of what we call headroom. There's a lot of room for error. Say you hit one chord that's really just louder than the others, that one chord isn't going to clip. It's not going to hit 0 and distort. It's going to hit like -6 and it's going to sound perfectly fine. And then everything else that you play is going to be down around -12. That's why we shoot for that zone. You don't want to be too quiet, but you also don't want to be too loud. Okay, let's do one last review. So far in this video, we learned what an interface is and how it functions. We learned how to hook up your microphone. We learned where to place your microphone. We learned how to set the levels of that microphone. And now you're pretty much ready to record. From there on out, it's just finding things that you like to play, sounds that you like. Really, once you master all this stuff, then I would say start playing around, doing different mic positions and stuff like that. But trust me, really master the basics. Get this down right at the beginning, and everything you do after will just come so easily. In future videos of this series, I'm going to be covering different types of microphones, different mic techniques. You can do some pretty wacky stuff and get some really cool sounds. We're also going to cover how to record guitar directly into the interface, so not using a microphone or an amplifier at all. We're going to cover a bunch of really cool stuff, but just really trust me on getting these basics down. It's something that I wish I did better at first when I started recording. So that about does it for this intro video on getting started recording guitar at home. You have all the tools now that you need. Go out there and have some fun. Peace.